Co-main event time now, and we are going to the women's flyweight division. Valentina Shevchenko making the 6th defense of her title. This time, she is taking on the 3rd seed Lauren Murphy. So Shevchenko hoping to try and equal Ronda Rousey's record for the most title defenses for a female fighter. Before we actually get onto the fight itself, though, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about Lauren Murphy. Now, you know me, John. I love a good story when it comes to MMA. And in my opinion, Lauren Murphy has one of the best stories over the past couple of years, because if you know Lauren Murphy's background, she had a bit of a troubled young adulthood. She took up jiu-jitsu basically on a whim. I think she accompanied her son to a class, fell in love with the sport and took it up as a pastime. She makes it into the UFC, has a couple of struggles early on when she fights a bantamweight, and moves down to flyweight basically as the sort of last resort to turn around her career. She's now won 5 fights in a row. Admittedly, some of them have been very fortunate. And now at 38 years old, she's fighting for the title. Now, regardless of what you think of Lauren Murphy, and I know there's a lot of people that aren't too keen on her, that's a fantastic story to actually get this opportunity.
Yeah, it's not bad. I know you are a sucker for the stories. You've been kind of manifesting this Lauren Murphy title shot for the past year, I think. But Um, and I do kind of like Murphy. I'll say two nice things about her, and that's she's been kind of a money train her past few fights. Winning as an underdog several times. A few times where she was in closely lined fights, but ended up looking like a huge favorite versus Shakarova and versus Roxanne. And the other thing is, I think she really understands, as I call it, the meta of MMA, where her fight against Andrea Lee is a perfect example of round sequencing, I'll call it, is where you can lose the first 4 minutes of a round, but as long as you end that last minute strong, like if you end that last minute with a takedown and some top time, you can erase that 4 minutes of the early round and steal the round off of that one action alone. And Lauren Murphy did that exact formula versus Andrea Lee. I thought she lost about 12 or 13 minutes of that fight, and then ended up winning a decision just because she was hitting those late takedowns. So I think her coaches have some sort of code with her or something that were 60 seconds, 30 seconds left in a round, she's going to be shooting takedowns. And that's what won her the fight. Those controversial fights that you just mentioned, the split decisions over Calderwood and over Lee, those late takedowns and top time is what won her those fights. So I like Murphy. I've won money on her in her current run. But, unfortunately, she is kind of drawing dead here, in my opinion. And I'll pass it back to you before we start talking about the actual matchup itself, Karl.
Yes, I'm in a very similar boat. Quite ironic considering her nickname is Lucky. But Lauren Murphy has had a lot of luck during this run, because I checked some of the stats. All of the media who was scoring the fight for Andrea Lee, I think there were like 12 or 13 of them, all of them scored it in favour of Lee. And of course, Murphy got the decision. And then I think 11 of the 17 who judged the fight between her and Jojo, 11 of the 17 scored it for Calderwood. So she has been very fortunate with some of these decisions, as good as the run of form has been. But there's a big jump between fighting Andrea Lee and Joanne Calderwood and fighting Valentina Shevchenko. And I'll pose this sort of question to you. We've seen some good performances from Shevchenko, especially during this flyweight run. Was the Andrade performance the best we've seen from her in the UFC?
I would say yes, just because it was probably the best opponent, the most dangerous opponent that she's fought. I mean, I think the Jessica I fight might have been a little more flawless, and obviously ending with a much more emphatic, perfect knockout. But for her to be fighting a former champion, a woman who actually has finishing power, who has multi-threat in terms of takedowns and striking, for her to just decimate her so easily, I think it probably was her best performance. And I suck at picking Shevchenko outcomes. I mean, I think I've been wrong in the past like 3 or 4 in a row. Every time I pick her to win by decision, she finishes. Every time I pick her to win by finish, she goes to decision. So I'm no good at picking the outcomes here. So whatever I end up picking, maybe you guys should just bet on the opposite of that.
The big thing that stood out for me with Shevchenko fighting a flyweight is how much more comfortable she is grappling. Because if you go back and you watch her bantamweight fights, like, she was tiny for that weight class. Go back and watch her versus Holly, and the size differential between the two is ridiculous. But because she's fighting
Yeah.
girls who are around the same sort of size, she's much more comfortable grappling. She's got some fantastic judo throws and judo trips. And I think there was a lot of people that maybe sort of painted Shevchenko as just a striker. And that's one thing that's definitely changed.
Yeah, definitely been looking hit a lot more takedowns in her fights lately. She hit 7 versus Andrade, which is impressive considering it was only like a 7-minute fight. But starting to think about where Murphy can present a threat for her in the striking, I don't think it's going to be the Murphy's range. I mean, if Andrea Lee and Joanne Calderwood were having success against Murphy, I think Shevchenko is probably going to butcher her on the feet. And that leads the offensive wrestling being the other path for Murphy. And Murphy can hit takedowns. She knows how to time them, as I mentioned, but Shevchenko's takedown defense is not bad enough to the point where I think that Murphy can really have sustained success on top. We did see Shevchenko in her most vulnerable moment in the past 3 or 4 years versus Jennifer Maia when she got taken down and put on bottom there. But I mean, that was kind of a weird random moment of a fight. She did win that fight 49-46, won every other minute of that fight besides that one moment where she got taken down. And I think Maya is a little bit bulkier and heavier than Murphy. And that's why I think Maya was able to get on top and win that one round. But I don't see Murphy having that same ability. I really don't see anywhere where Murphy is going to pose a threat to Shevchenko. I think Shevchenko is, just a little bit better everywhere. And, I guess Murphy winning 3 out of 5 rounds with her top position is going to be her best chance at winning, but that seems extremely low outcome. What are the numbers on the INC predictions for this one, Karl?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that because we always run opinion polls on the community tab for each of the title fights and main events that the UFC do. At the moment, Lauren Murphy has 2% of people picking her to win. Now, to put that into perspective, Felicia Spencer in her title fight had 10%, and Jennifer Maia, which was the second lowest, had 5%. So only 2% of people are picking Lauren Murphy to win this one. Is that people sort of doubting Lauren Murphy's ability or praising Shevchenko's?
I think 1% of that 2% is people just being like, "Oh, this will be funny if I click this." I think only 1% of that 2% are people actually believing that she can win the fight. I mean, I guess, like you said, the one thing you have a good outcome on this fight or outlook on this fight because even though you're not interested in how the matchup is going, you're looking at something positive. Oh, Murphy worked her way up to a title shot. She won 4 fights in a row. She got a title shot. That is the one, promising moment you can take from this fight. But because as a matchup, I just see Murphy having nothing for Shevchenko. And I like Lauren Murphy, so I hope she doesn't get hurt. I hope she, maybe gets submitted instead of getting her face smashed in like Andrade did. But I will be picking Shevchenko finish. Like I said, I know I suck at this. I'm not so if you're betting on this fight, you might want to bet on Shevchenko decision because I suck at picking them, but I'll pick Shevchenko finish.
I'm going to be picking a Shevchenko decision.
Nice.
Shevchenko often alternates between having these sort of emphatic big wins and choosing something quite dull. So we saw a head kick
Yeah.
Jessica Rai, and then she had that ball with Carmouche. Same with Chukagian and Jennifer Maia. Andrade was a fantastic performance, and I can see Shevchenko maybe playing it safe once again. And sort of a job done performance. 50-45, bish bash bosh, no harm, and
It's
move
like
on to the
it's like
next.
she doesn't want to build up too much momentum. She's like, "Oh, I just finished my last opponent, in front of a full arena in Florida. Let's make this fight as boring as possible and win via wrestling for 5 rounds." So that's entirely possible. Um, with these 3 5-round fights, my worst fear is all 3 go the full 5 rounds, and I favor 2 of them pretty heavily to go the full 5. So let's hope Shevchenko can put us out of our mercy and get this fight card over before 2 a.m. Eastern time.